Hello, my name's Jamie, and welcome to this video. Today, taking a little look at Cycles X, the new and improved and updated version of Cycles. Hit like and subscribe to help support the channel. So right now, I'm in Blender 2.93, and regular cycles and all that sort of stuff. Nothing too crazy happening here. So what I've been doing is I've made a few render comparisons to see the difference in time as best as I could. I'll get into a bit more detail once I'm showing you my results, but it's difficult to compare old Cycles versus new Cycles X too accurately because of the changes of the way that the renderer works. The same settings don't necessarily translate, and I've got an example of that I will bring up in a moment. So I've taken some screenshots of the final render and the render time of the Blender render window, so you can see that these are what my numbers are. So first up, we've got the barbershop scene from Agent 237, and this is just rendered with the settings that came in the file. And this first one is in 2.93, so we've got a render time of 35 minutes 47 seconds, and it was using 2 gigs of RAM. Nothing too exciting there. It's a bit grainy. This one was at the settings that came with the file, which was 32 samples, and it looks fine. There's no denoising or anything on this one. And then I went over to Cycles X in Blender 3, and when I opened the file, the samples had changed to 800, which I thought was a bit weird. So, and I hadn't changed any settings. So what I did was I set the samples back to 32, and this is what came out. A really grainy, low quality version. It actually used up more memory, but it rendered quite quickly, 1:55. So, 2 minutes to get a grainy render. You could probably denoise this and get a decent-ish render. It is worth mentioning that there was like a transparent cube halfway through the scene that was like a fog object that I had to disable in this render because it was just rendering it as a black cube in Blender 3. So that's one of the things. It's an alpha version of a renderer, so there are going to be occasional things that it just isn't working. So then I did another test render with the 800 samples that Blender had decided that it needed, and it came out looking like this. Looks great. 45 minutes 25 seconds, so that's 10 minutes more than this for way more quality. I was thinking about playing with the samples to see if we could get a closer time, to see if we can get a time versus quality comparison, but it is half an hour to an hour per render, and I've only got limited free time that I can work on things. So I think you can see that Cycles X is doing a much better job, but it's one of those things where we probably want to wait until Cycles X is production ready, and then we can actually throw some scenes at it that are more designed for the strengths of Cycles X to see what it can really do. So for now, we've just sort of got these comparisons that we can sort of work with. Next up, we've got this interior scene. This is another one from the Blender demos downloads that you can get. This was the 2.93 initial version, and this is fine. The denoiser did a bit of funny stuff with the detail in the front of this floor cushion, and in this one as well. So that's something to bear in mind. And that surprised me a little bit because in 2.93 there's supposed to be an update to the denoiser, and there was much more detail in this area before the denoiser hit it. But you can see that there's much more detail on the top here, but on the side, the denoiser has just decided that that's noise and it's not actual detail. So here we've got a render with exactly the same settings in Cycles X. You'll notice actually that the denoiser has done much less damage to the front of this floor cushion, but there's much less detail actually in the top. And I noticed, especially in like this glass panel situation, there's much less detail. It's just a big grey blob versus this one where there's this big noisy blob. So overall, the Cycles X render looks much cleaner, and it came in at 4 minutes and 13 versus 22 minutes 25 for 2.93 for a much grainier render. And then what I did was to try and get some of the detail back in this glass window. I think it's like a corrugated glass. I actually doubled the samples for what was the preset. It was like something weird like 567, so I just did a ×2. And so the time did go up to 7 minutes 43, which is actually not double the time. So that shows you that It's not just the samples that affect the time. There's other stuff going on behind the scenes. But the floor cushion's looking pretty good. The top of it is still a bit blurry, whereas in 2.93 it was much more detailed. Then we've got a little bit of that corrugated detail showing through with the higher samples. But overall, you can definitely tell that in this scene, Cycles X is definitely doing much better. So next I wanted to chuck an exterior scene at Cycles X to see how it compared, because I've heard that it's not much better in exterior scenes currently. And I had recently seen a tutorial in my recommended on YouTube by Just the Basic on creating a realistic looking forest. So I thought I'd see what tools and techniques he used and produce my own sort of version of his scene. So this was my result. I was pretty happy with how the trees and the leaves and stuff turned out. I was having issues with like the rotation on the foliage. I couldn't get it to rotate randomly. And then I also chucked an adaptive subdivision displacement on the ground, and that gave a bit more detail. It also went a bit weird and like there's some lines and stuff, so I'd probably want to play with those settings a bit more if I was doing a final scene. But just for the sake of comparison, we've got 6 minutes 16 in 2.93, and then in 3.0 or Cycles X, we've got 7 minutes and 4. Now, that's not too huge of a difference. It's about an extra 40-50 seconds. That's fine. But I did do a second test render later on, and I didn't record it, but it actually took 15 minutes. So it seems fairly clear that there's some weird stuff going on there. I'm not too sure what happened because I didn't change any settings, but I just did an extra couple of quick test renders to see how consistent the times were. And the 2.93 render was, I think it was a few seconds slower, and then Cycles X was like more than double the time. So that tells me it's not super stable, and it's definitely not production ready. So for now, I'm impressed with some of the interior results that we were getting, some decent times, some pretty decent results, but losing a bit of detail here and there. But what that does mean is I could turn the denoiser off and crank the samples and get a much closer result without losing too much control over what the denoiser is doing. So that's just my thoughts on how Cycles X is coming along. I don't want to spend too much more time with it at the moment because it is so experimental and new. I'll probably take a look again once Blender 3 hits beta, just so it can have some time to mature, so that the code base can be worked on a bit more and any more bugs ironed out. I have seen that other people are having various random little issues with it, so that's not too surprising. Based on what reports I've seen, it looks like they've thrown out some of the old code base and they're completely refactoring some other parts of it, plus adding whatever new features that they want to add. But it is fun to see where Blender's development is going, and I very much look forward to the releases upcoming in the future. If you've enjoyed today's video, be sure to like and subscribe and all that kind of YouTube-y kind of stuff. So there's some links to stuff in the description if you're interested in supporting the channel. And until next time, I will see you later. Goodbye!